Hi everyone. Welcome to our event today. Where is the anemia target for young children? The missing World Health Assembly nutrition target. My name is Mandana Rabi. I am the Vice President of Global Technical Services and Chief Technical Advisor at Nutrition International. NI is a global nutrition organization based in Ottawa, Canada, with regional offices in Asia and Africa. We have country offices in the developing countries where we support delivery of nutrition interventions and improving delivery, integrating nutrition into new platforms, supporting policy, and also supporting cutting-edge research. I'm also honored to be hosting this event today on behalf of the Home Fortification Technical Advisory Group, which is a global technical advisory group based currently at Nutrition International and co-chaired by NI and UNICEF, with members from US CDC, from UC Davis, University of Toronto Hospital for Sick Kids, Sight and Life, the World Food Programme, the World Bank, and others. We provide leadership by advocating and supporting well-designed and effective home fortification interventions for children and women at scale based on sound technical guidance and best practices. So I just wanted to express my thanks to all the colleagues from HF-TAG and NI and UNICEF who have been involved and supporting this event's organization. So why are we here today? We know that anemia among young children still persists as a global health problem for many reasons. It could be because of lack of political awareness, perhaps programmatic limitations regarding delivery of iron interventions, reduced efficacy of iron interventions in the presence of infection, inflammation, or other inhibitors of iron absorption, and also non-nutritional causes of anemia, because anemia is quite complex. And we wanted to come together today because the group organizing the session felt that setting a specific targets for reducing anemia and iron deficiency among young children will facilitate dedicating sufficient attention, funding, and resources for interventions, and also help us measure progress better towards the reduction of these goals. So the main objectives of this event today are understanding better childhood anemia, the causes, and how nutrition can have a significant impact in addressing childhood anemia, and also examining whether a global target for childhood anemia is actually called for, and if so, what would be a potential process for getting there. So with that background, I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Catherine Dewey, who is the Distinguished Professor Emerita of Nutrition from University of California, Davis. And she, of course, is well known in the global nutrition community. She has been the co-founder of UC Davis Program in International and Community Nutrition, which is now the Institute for Global Health. And her research has focused on maternal and child nutrition in vulnerable populations, with an emphasis on interventions to prevent malnutrition during the first 1,000 days. So her title of the talk would be Meeting Iron Needs of Infants and Young Children, 6 to 24 months of age, Challenges and Opportunities. Dr. Dewey, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mandana. It is a great pleasure to be with everyone. And I'd like to go ahead and just get started with the slides. Now, as Mandana explained, iron deficiency is not the only cause of anemia, but it is the most common cause among infants and young children from 6 to 24 months of age. So I'll be talking about both the challenges, but more importantly, the opportunities for meeting iron needs during this age interval. Next. First, I'd like to say that I have no financial relationships with any commercial interests on this topic. Next. Now, for infants who are normal birth weight and normal gestational age, the iron stores at birth can meet the iron needs of most exclusively breastfed infants for at least 6 months, assuming delayed umbilical cord clamping. But human milk contains relatively little iron, and this is probably adaptive for reasons that I won't have time to go into today. So after 6 months of age, iron from non-breast milk sources is needed. And we have good estimates of the average requirement and the recommended dietary allowance from several sources. They both assume 10% absorption. And the point I'd like to make with this table is that the needs are actually higher at 6 to 12 months of age than they are in the second year of life. And this is because the very rapid growth and development during infancy. It's also important to note that absorption from plant-based foods, particularly those with high concentrations of phytate, is likely to be less than 10%. So achieving adequate iron intake after 6 months of age is challenging, and nearly all of the recommended intake for iron needs to come from complementary foods. Now, breastfed infants need relatively small amounts of complementary foods as shown here. And for that reason, next, the iron density of the foods they eat in terms of milligrams of iron per 100 calories needs to be very high. So you can see in the table that at 6 to 9 months, infants need 4.5 milligrams of iron per 100 calories. And if you look at the bottom for an adult male, that's only 0.5. So infants need 9 times as much per 100 calories. And yet the person in the household who's most likely to get the iron-rich foods such as meat is the adult male and not the infant. Next. Now, in many populations, iron intake from typical complementary foods is far below the amounts needed. And even with best case scenario family food menus, the iron density of the hypothetical infant diet among low-income households is far below the target. Even in the US, 77% of human milk-fed infants at 6 to 12 months consume less than the average requirement for iron. With optimization modeling, we can demonstrate that iron requirements for infants under 12 months can be met without fortified foods, but only if foods like liver are consumed daily. That's not very realistic. So if we look at diverse dietary patterns that have a balance of foods like grains, legumes, egg, green leafy vegetables, and fish or chicken, only 26 to 37% of iron needs at 6 to 8 months and 35 to 52% at 9 to 12 months can be met. Next. And so it's a real challenge in that first year to meet those needs. But in the second year of life, inadequate iron intake is still prevalent, although with careful selection of foods, it is somewhat easier to meet iron needs than is the case at 6 to 12 months. Next. So that poses the question of whether infant iron intakes have always been low. This slide shows the estimated iron intake as the percentage of the RNI at 9 to 11 months. Pause, please pause. Thank you. And I've chosen this interval because most infants will have depleted iron stores at that age. Now, breast milk alone contributes only 2% of the recommended nutrient intake. Next, when we add the typical complementary foods consumed in low-income countries, the total intake reaches only 34% of the recommended intake. Next. And even with a diverse diet with animal source foods that I showed previously, it reaches only 53%. So I've always been puzzled by this. We did some analyses looking at the hypothetical diet of pre-agricultural human populations. And when we did that, we were quite fascinated to find that the total iron intake at this age reaches nearly 100% of the recommended intake. Next. So there are a number of potential options for meeting iron needs of breastfed infants and children at this age. And I think most of us would agree that dietary diversification and selection of iron-rich complementary foods should always be the first priority. But cost and access are often barriers. So in the next set of slides, I will go through the other items listed here one by one to talk about their pros and cons. Next. So first, what is the potential for large-scale food fortification of staple foods to meet the iron needs of infants? Well, unfortunately, it's unlikely to meet the gap in iron intake less than 12 months. For maize or wheat flour, the recommended fortification level is 60 milligrams per kilogram of flour. So if we assume that, let's say, 50% of the energy needed from complementary foods is provided by fortified maize or wheat, this would provide only 14 to 22% of the RDA. And the calculation by which we arrived at that is shown in the bullet point. Next. After 12 months, the consumption of 275 calories of fortified maize or wheat flour, which is 50% of the energy needed from complementary foods, would provide 4.5 milligrams of iron. And this is 64% of the RDA, a much more substantial contribution than is possible during infancy. Next. So what about biofortification of staple foods? And this too is likely to fall short of meeting the iron needs under 12 months. At the highest concentration of iron achieved in biofortified pearl millet and beans, 50% of complementary food energy from those foods would provide only 22 to 32% of the RDA. After 12 months, however, the amount of iron provided by 50% of complementary food calories would actually meet about 94% of the RDA, which is, again, a much more substantial amount. Now, these estimates for both staple food and biofortification assume 10% iron absorption, which may be reasonable for young children with iron deficiency, but it's likely an overestimate for a healthy population. It also may be unrealistic to assume that infants or toddlers could consume the required amounts of cooked beans or millet every day in that quantity. Next. And thus, for prevention of iron deficiency, these approaches are insufficient for infants, although they do hold promise for toddlers greater than 12 months of age. So what about iron supplements? These kinds of drops and syrups have been successfully used for the treatment of iron deficiency anemia. However, their effectiveness in non-controlled environments is markedly affected by minor adverse consequences, including a strong metallic taste and teeth staining. There's also little evidence of the impact of iron supplementation on anemia prevalence in national and subnational programs because it's not usually scaled up very widely. And thus there is a growing focus on alternative ways to provide iron to infants and young children. Next. And that brings us to fortified foods for infants and young children, which are specifically formulated to allow for a greater level of iron fortification, much higher than is possible for the general public. Fortified blended foods such as corn-soy blend are examples of targeted foods that are efficacious for improving iron status. But it can be challenging to achieve the fortification levels that are sufficient for infants 6 to 9 months of age and not excessive at 12 to 24 months, given differences in the amounts of food consumed. So that brings us to home or point of use fortification with iron-containing products. Most of you are familiar with multiple micronutrient powders, which have been recommended since 2003 by WHO and UNICEF in populations where the prevalence of anemia in children under 2 or under 5 is 20% or higher. A recent Cochrane review demonstrated that MNPs can achieve an 18% reduction in anemia and a 53% reduction in iron deficiency. More recently, there's growing evidence on the efficacy of small quantity lipid-based nutrient supplements, which are also a type of home fortification because the amount used, about 4 teaspoons per day, can be mixed with home prepared foods. Recent systematic reviews have shown a 16 to 21% reduction in anemia, a 56% reduction in iron deficiency, and a 64% reduction in iron deficiency anemia with this approach. Now, of course, provision of iron in any product aimed at infants and young children raises questions of safety with regard to potentially increased risk of certain infections, such as malaria and diarrhea. A Cochrane review concluded, however, that MMPs did not increase diarrhea, upper respiratory infection, malaria, or all-cause morbidity. And in a more recent analysis, there was no effect of MMPs on diarrhea prevalence, and you can see the odds ratio there of 0.95. There's also no evidence of adverse effects of small quantity LNS with 6 to 9 milligrams of iron, and a meta-analysis published in 2019 suggests a 27% reduction in all-cause mortality between 6 and 24 months of age. The potential risk of these products may be related to the dose of iron, and further research is needed on how to optimize the amount and the form of iron provided so as to prevent iron deficiency and anemia while minimizing the risk of adverse outcomes. Although the net health benefits of fortified products such as MMPs may be context specific, for most countries, they appear to be positive. And this is very important because the prevalence of anemia in children under 5 in 2019 was nearly 40%, and that prevalence has changed very little since 2010. This graph shows the areas in which the prevalence in dark red is greater than 40%. Next. Now, the etiology of anemia is complex, as Mandana mentioned, and iron is not the only nutrient that may be involved, although it is a major factor. Non-nutrient related causes of anemia include malaria, chronic inflammation, and recurrent infections, and all of these need to be addressed in comprehensive programs to control anemia among infants and young children. So in conclusion, we've covered the idea that infants and young children need iron-rich diets to support blood volume expansion, brain development, and tissue growth. Iron intakes usually fall well below the recommended intakes at 6 to 24 months. And the percentage of children under 5 with anemia is high and has changed very little during the past 10 years. Iron deficiency is a key contributor. The World Health Assembly set a target of a 50% reduction of anemia in women of reproductive age by 2025, but did not set an anemia target for infants and young children. Given the challenge of meeting iron needs from typical complementary food diets and the availability of successful evidence-based fortification strategies for this age group, we encourage planners, speakers, and donors at the Nutrition for Growth Summit to call for the World Health Assembly to set similar anemia targets for infants and young children, and to promote investment in evidence-based interventions to improve the iron status of young children. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention and turn it back over to Mandana.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Kay. A lot of very important information and further points for discussion at the session today. Just two quick notes to our audience. One is that you can actually post your questions as our presenters speak. After the next two presenters, we will have a few minutes for addressing the questions. And my wonderful colleagues Ad and I are working behind the scenes, compiling, and we will be covering as many as we can. I also wanted to mention that the presentations, the slides of the presentations are going to be available in the resources section of the platform after the presentations are made. So with that, I would like to introduce our next speaker, who is Lisa Rogers. She's a technical officer with the Department of Nutrition and Food Safety at the World Health Organization in Geneva. We are really honored to have her today with us. Her work is focused on micronutrients mostly and coordinates the development of evidence-informed guidance on effective nutrition actions. And today she will be talking about addressing anemia in young children. Over to you, Lisa.
Great. Thank you very much, Mandana. I appreciate that. And just a big thank you to the HF Tag too for the invitation to join this webinar today and for all of the wonderful work that you are doing on home fortification. So today I'll give just a brief introduction on how and why the global nutrition targets were created, their alignment with the SDGs, what has been done to draw attention to these targets and to stimulate action, and then go into the current situation of anemia in children, looking at the latest trends. And I will then end with some actions WHO has for intervening. Next slide, please. In recognizing the importance of alleviating malnutrition and improving nutritional status in the earliest stages of development, the 65th World Health Assembly approved a comprehensive implementation plan on maternal, infant, and young child nutrition. And within this plan, they established 6 global nutrition targets, and they proposed different actions to support the achievement of these targets. These targets are felt to be vital for identifying the priority areas for action and also for catalyzing global change. The targets are completely voluntary, but they're felt to guide the priorities and goals that can be established at the country level. These goals are measured against a baseline starting at 2012, and they are to be achieved by 2025. And there's currently a proposal underway to extend this to 2030 as well. Next slide, please. And these global nutrition targets include a reduction in the number of children who are stunted, reduction in anemia of women of reproductive age, reducing low birth weight, having a no increase in child overweight, increasing the rate of exclusive breastfeeding, and reducing childhood wasting. So all of these global targets were developed to address the triple burden of malnutrition, that being undernutrition in the form of stunting and wasting, micronutrient deficiencies, and overweight and obesity, with a focus on the period from conception through the first years of life. Next slide, please. And these global targets aim to help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And there is some alignment of the targets, particularly with SDG 2 on zero hunger and its target 2.2 on ending all forms of malnutrition, for which there includes different indicators like the prevalence of stunting, the prevalence of wasting and overweight, and most recently, the indicator on the prevalence of anemia in women of reproductive age was added just last year. Next. So we know countries are facing very complex overlays of malnutrition burdens that are often connected, and concentrated actions are needed at the policy, health system, and community levels. So in addition to support from many other agencies, WHO has developed several documents and tools to support actions to address these global targets. We have developed a series of 6 policy briefs, each linked to one of the global targets. And these are meant to guide decision makers on what actions need to be taken in order to achieve progress. There is good recognition that the 6 targets are very interlinked, and many of the recommended interventions can help make progress towards multiple targets. And as you all probably know, that WHO produces many different guidelines, and it can be very difficult to find some of these guidelines and to know which one is the most recent. And therefore, the WHO e-Library of Evidence for Nutrition Actions, also known as ELANA, was developed in order to serve as a single point of reference for the latest nutrition guidelines, recommendations, and the related information. And some of this information includes the systematic reviews that were developed in order to inform the recommendation, different biological, behavioral, and contextual rationale statements, different commentaries from the invited experts, and also links to publications that assess cost effectiveness on those interventions as well. And so within the ELANA platform, all the different interventions have been organized by the global target for ease of reference. So you can click on the global target that you're interested in addressing, and a list of interventions and links to those recommendations are provided for the user. And then in 2019, the UN Secretary General called for the development of a global action plan on wasting. And this work was led by 5 different UN agencies in consultation with different stakeholders. And just last year, a framework for action to accelerate progress in preventing and managing childhood wasting was published. And what this framework does is enable the different UN agencies to develop a more targeted roadmap for action that will then support the countries to develop concrete commitments, targets, and actions that are very specific for their own context and can help accelerate progress in these areas. Next slide, please. Now, this comprehensive implementation plan that I discussed earlier also called for a well-defined monitoring framework. And this allows for the harmonization of internationally accepted approaches to monitoring the progress towards these global nutrition targets, both at the national level and the global level. So the monitoring framework has a core set of indicators to be reported on by all countries, and also an extended set of indicators, which countries can then draw on to design their national nutrition surveillance systems in a way that fits their own needs. There are several different types of indicators, including primary and intermediate indicators, process indicators, and indicators on the policy, environment, and capacity. So as an example of one of the primary outcome indicators is anemia in women of reproductive age. And so what this guidance does is to harmonize this indicator. It provides a definition, giving specific instructions for any adjustments that might be needed, like adjusting for altitude and smoking for hemoglobin levels where appropriate. It then recommends that the indicator be collected at a specific frequency. So here it's estimated that it should be collected every 3 to 5 years, and gives suggestions on how data should be presented so that we can have comparable data among the countries at the end. Next slide, please. And within our WHO Nutrition Information System, so we have this landscape information system, we've taken this global nutrition monitoring framework and turned them into country profiles. And this has been developed to help the countries monitor their own progress towards the global targets, measuring progress of the primary and intermediate outcomes, as well as monitoring programs and policies that can influence either directly or indirectly the pathways of one or more of these primary outcomes. So each country has its own data mapped in this country profile. Next slide, please. And then we have what's called the Global Targets Tracking Tool. And this takes things just a step further in bringing together all the modeling estimates that have been conducted to provide comparable and up-to-date data on these primary outcome indicators for the global targets. The tool helps the countries to set their own national targets, to explore different scenarios of progress over time on what needs to happen in the interim in order to reach these targets. The tool also provides an overall global summary of progress on the targets and provides maps of the estimates as well, so you can see where the burden is lying. And this slide also reminds us that what gets measured gets done, or maybe is more likely to get done, then that all remains to be seen. So next slide, please. The data and the estimates also feeds into different global reports, and these include things like the Global Nutrition Report that assesses progress in meeting the global targets and identifies gaps and proposes ways to fill those gaps. In addition, the State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World, or also known as a SOFI report, also helps to monitor progress towards meeting the global nutrition targets, as well as targets related to diet-related NCDs and the SDG targets 2.1 and 2.2. So all of these products, all the documents and tools, they do help to bring the much needed visibility to some of the top nutrition challenges that we're facing. But I think what remains to be seen is just how much the world can join together to make the needed difference to achieve these goals, which is recognized that it's not very easy. And although some progress has been made, we know that the world is not on track for reaching many of these global targets. And as Kay mentioned, anemia is a big challenge. Next slide, please. WHO recently updated the global estimates of anemia. It estimated that anemia affects approximately 30% of women of reproductive age, 37% of pregnant women, and 40% of children 6 to 59 months of age. And as Kay noted, much of this burden lies in regions of Africa and Southeast Asia. So in this map, the darker the red color, then that means the higher the prevalence of anemia. Next slide, please. And in this graph, I just wanted to show you the trends over the years from 2000 to 2019 that were just estimated. On this graph, the top blue line represents total anemia. The middle orange line represents moderate and severe anemia taken together. And then the lower line in red represents just severe anemia alone. And the shaded areas indicate the credibility intervals. So looking at that top blue line for total anemia in children, at the far left, you see a predicted prevalence of about 48% in the year 2000. Then if you move to the middle of the graph in that blue line, you'll see that in 2010, it was about 42%. And we see about a decline of 0.5 to 0.8% annually from 2000 to 2012. After which we see much smaller declines of about 0.2 to 0.3 until 2016, and then it really becomes stagnant. And the predicted prevalence of anemia in children is 40% there. And when we look at that orange line representing the moderate plus severe anemia together, we see a fairly similar pattern of that to total anemia, but with some relative improvements if you calculate the proportion of total anemia that is classified as moderate and severe. So when I did this calculation, it's about 60% of all anemia that was predicted to be moderate or severe in 2000 and reducing to about 50% in 2019. So in other words, in about 2000, about 40% of those with anemia had mild anemia. And in 2019, this increased to about 50%. And then for that bottom red line for severe anemia, the pattern again looks similar with a predicted prevalence estimate of 3% in 2000, going down to just over 1% in 2019. So about 6% of all anemia was severe in 2000, and this decreased about 3% in 2019. Next slide, please. And as Kay mentioned, there are a number of interventions that can be used to address anemia in children, and WHO is working on updating some of the guidance around complementary feeding of infants and young children, as well as the assessment of hemoglobin concentrations for all population groups. And that's for defining the threshold to indicate anemia. And WHO will be able to announce 2 additional initiatives on anemia later this month at the Nutrition for Growth Summit. So please stay tuned and hear those initiatives. And we look forward to working with everyone to step up the efforts to address childhood anemia, which is extremely important. So again, thank you for your attention. I turn back over to Mandana.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's really great to get an update on all the great work that you're doing at WHO and just like the sheer amount of activities. And it's also exciting to hear that these initiatives are upcoming in the context of the Nutrition for Growth. I would like to now introduce our third speaker today, my colleague Dylan Walters, who is Project Director for Health Economics at Nutrition International and co-chair of the Nutrition Scaling Working Group. His work focuses on developing and leading the health economics research, evaluation and modeling and policy projects related to maternal and child nutrition for NI, as well as working with partners to advance the domain of nutrition through economic analyses. And I think this is a great fit for today's conversation, talking about how we will address issues of a scale for interventions to address anemia in young children. Dylan, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mandana. I'm honored to be here today to speak to you. And today I hope to build on the presentations by Kay and Lisa by using some lessons from economic analyses as well as the science of scaling to help motivate the setting of a target for a reduction of anemia in children, as well as to outline a few things we need to think about in order to reach that goal of achieving a sustainable impact at a large scale. Today I'm representing Nutrition International and the Nutrition Scaling Working Group, as Mandana mentioned, which is a part of the community of practice on scaling development outcomes that is dedicated to advancing the practice of scaling. Next. Next. So as the previous presenter outlined, setting of a target is important for a number of reasons. Not only does it help with the setting of national targets, but it's influential in other ways. It's from the experience of the Global Investment Framework for Nutrition, which followed the setting of the global nutrition targets. We saw that it helped motivate the development of a costed scaling plan and an engine for global advocacy for nutrition, which then I feel is really instrumental in leading to increased national and subnational awareness for these priority interventions or systems that are needed. And that's really cascade down into national and donor policy change or financing that are needed for sustainable scaling. Next. In addition to the health rationale or justification for setting a target, I believe there's also a really strong argument from a human capital and economic perspective. for why the reduction of anemia is in children is important. We've known from research that childhood anemia is associated with a decrease in income and wages in adulthood. And from a new tool that we're developing at Nutrition International and some economic analyses, we've calculated that the future economic productivity losses associated with childhood anemia are very significant, in the hundreds of billions of dollars, and on par with the economic burden of some of the other World Health Assembly targets, if not greater than some of the ones that we're speaking about today as well. Next. Now, for scaling to really take off, we have some of the prerequisites, some strong evidence on efficacy and effectiveness, WHO recommendations on MMPs, some cost-benefit analyses or cost-effectiveness analyses, and Lancet series recommendations recently on SQLNS as well. But there's still a few boxes to check off. WHO guidance on SQLNS, better coverage data, I think would be very helpful. And importantly, there seems to be a persisting knowledge gap on the science of scaling and how to apply this towards home fortification. Next. Now, the scaling community of practice has been working, as well as others in the research community, to advance the science of scaling, as well as implementation science, which are quite related. Now, there are a number of, a new paper by the scaling community of practice has identified 5 different approaches to large-scale change across the development sectors. Traditional scaling, scaling from a systems perspective, transformational scaling, narrow systems change, or broad systems change. Now, one of these may be more appropriate for different contexts for scaling of home fortification, which seems to be, in my view, an adoption of a technical innovation by individuals that still need to take systems that are necessary into account. Next. Researchers such as Gillespie et al. From IFPRI and collaborators have been working for a few years to describe the necessary elements for scaling nutrition impact and the drivers of change for nutrition interventions. They've reviewed a number of studies as well as examined case studies in detail to outline a framework for scaling nutrition impact. And some of the key drivers of change that they've highlighted include commitment to the change, clear vertical and horizontal coherence, accountability, availability of data and evidence, ensuring that there's capacity for that scale up, leadership, and critically financing as well. Next. The scaling community of practice has also looked across development sectors and to come up with a framework for the principles of scaling. This is a new framework that is going to be discussed in detail at a plenary talk next week on November 23rd that you can find out more information about at www.scalingcommunitypractice.com. But this cross-sectoral framework, in my view, I find it very helpful, but it helps implementers or planners or the nutrition community visualize key elements for scaling. We have to be clear that we know what the vision for scaling is, what the core elements of innovation or scalability are, who needs to be involved from a stakeholder's perspective, having a plan to address system constraints and a strategy and pathway for scale, as well as how we will scale using our experience, incentives, advocacy, and adaptation to sustain. And of course, all of this is underpinned with the generation and use of evidence through our scaling strategy. Next. I believe from these scaling frameworks, there's a couple of key areas for the home fortification to focus on. Thinking intentionally about scaling from the beginning, importantly, as well as since we will need a mix of delivery platforms that are context specific to potential public and private channels, that would be an area to focus on. And understanding how scale up will be incentivization of households and private sectors to drive that demand. Next. From some economic analyses, as well as other analyses that our team and others in the field of economics have been doing, there's a couple key observations I think that are of interest for the scale up of home fortification. From a nutrition scaling working group retrospective review on the state of scale, we looked at other interventions that have been scaled up over the last 20 years and to see what the trends or patterns of increasing coverage of those interventions have been. And one or 2 points that I'd like to draw out from this review is that while we may have very high ambitions for the rate of scale, it's very rare that nutrition interventions are scaled at the rate that we project in our plans and investment cases. I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing. I think we're ambitious by nature, but even vitamin A supplementation on average grew 1.7% in coverage per year through these low and middle income countries that we looked at. And the fastest country was only 5%. And this is much, much slower than often investment cases project. And personally, I think this having unrealistic scenarios have some risk to it, cause a higher estimate of actual financing needs that are needed, and risk not achieving those targets or having political support. So I think targets are important and plans, but we need to be realistic in our projections. Next. From a quick scan of national investment cases, as well as some subnational investment cases where micronutrient powders have been included, in the last 10 years, many done by the World Bank, as well as other multilateral agencies and Nutrition International for subnational investment cases in Kenya. We've observed that while home fortification can be present in those investment cases and have projections of coverage of 90 or 100% within 5 to 10 years, so far we haven't seen that scale up being actualized. Now that may be because of some of the factors that I've mentioned before, but also that there's some variation in the unit costs or the costing of those interventions, which is normal. But also that we may need some standardization in the costing and cost benefit analyses and quality checking of that to make sure that we are adequately costing the enabling environment, the delivery platforms, and full costs for those interventions to be funded and delivered adequately. Next. So just a few lessons from these analyses. Again, I think it's critical that we are realistic with scaling targets. Targets are important, but we don't want to risk having cost estimates that are too high or unaffordable for governments. And we think the costing and modeling should be done at the time of target setting. And that advocacy is really needed to ensure that home fortification is included in every global, national, or subnational investment case or plan from now on, as sometimes it is missed, whether it is in national investment cases or global financing facility investment cases. Next. So to conclude my presentation, I feel that in addition to the health argument for setting a vision and target for childhood anemia, I think there's a strong economic case that supports setting that target. Also feel that a global costed plan and target would be critical to stimulate global advocacy and influence policies and investments at the national and subnational level. And also home fortification, with home fortification, there's an important opportunity here to use home fortification as an example of how to scale intentionally from the beginning and infuse that science of scaling into its scaling pathway. Next. So thank you very much for your time and interest. I want to thank Nutrition International and Eleanor Crick Foundation for their support with the Nutrition Scaling Working Group. And if you're interested in participating or collaborating in this endeavor, you can find more information at www.scalingcommunityofpractice.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dylan. Really interesting presentation, has some additional food for thought about the scaling and also maybe making the MMPs and home fortification as a case example for addressing and using this scaling knowledge for better success. So I would like to move us now to the Q&A session and have the three presenters join me for that. I've had really interesting questions compiled from my NI colleagues and sent to me, so I'm going to address those to the presenters for discussion. Also, there are some questions that I think actually would be a better fit for our panel discussion, so please stay tuned. Some of those may come up later. So the first question is for Kay. There were a few questions related actually to the specific challenges of meeting iron needs in plant-based diets, or in mostly plant-based diets. So if you could comment on that, and also somebody had asked whether we would need perhaps different or even better formulations for home fortification products, specifically targeting these populations, for example, highly absorbent iron content, or adding probiotics or some other additional elements that would be more adapted to major plant-based diet for children. Over to you.
Thank you for that important question. We know that the absorption of iron from animal source foods is considerably higher than it is from plant-based foods, particularly because of the heme iron that's present in foods like meats. And it's one of the reasons why the pre-agricultural diet was so high in iron. It's actually 4 times higher in iron per 100 calories than the diet of modern day populations. That's because pre-agricultural humans consumed a lot of meat, but also animal source foods like insects and shellfish and fish. And some of those species were very high in iron, even among the fish. And then even the wild plant foods were higher in iron than they are today. So for populations that are consuming mostly plant-based diets, for children under 2, this does pose a major challenge to achieving adequate iron intake. We can do some things like enhancing absorption by including more vitamin C, for example, but even with that, you can't quite reach the levels that are needed. And I think that's one reason why fortification approaches are so important in populations that don't have access to enough iron-rich foods. But towards the future, I think a food-based approach is really what we're aiming for. There are some exciting developments on small fish that are particularly high in iron that won't necessarily meet the needs of completely plant-based diets, but it's one thing that we need to look at. There are places where animal source foods like chicken liver are relatively affordable and available. I know this has been used in Peru, for example, successfully. So I think there's more work to be done. And there may be opportunities, like you mentioned, for enhancing formulations to improve iron absorption even more than what it is now. And that could be prebiotics like galacto-oligosaccharides, maybe probiotics, although they tend to be a little more expensive. And then there are other types of iron that could be used and are in trials as well.
Thank you very much. The next question is for Lisa. And there are two related questions. One is, of course, the focus of today's conversation being a potential for a new WHA target. We would like to know more about what's the process for setting targets. And linked to that, there were a few questions about quality of data on anemia in young children and whether we are ready and able to actually set targets based on the type of data that we currently have available on the situation in young children.
Yes, two very, very good topics. So the process for generating the global targets for nutrition, it was a process that was led by the member states through the World Health Assembly with the support of WHO. So it really comes from the member states of WHO through the World Health Assembly to recommend that such a global target be developed, and with support from other member states as well. So it's a very heavy process, let's say, that goes through many channels. And I think, when I wasn't involved in the development of these global nutrition targets from the inception, but I tried to think back about why a target on childhood anemia may not have been added. And I know that they really wanted to make something, enough targets that are feasible, achievable. You can't have too many. And I really think that they believed that by having all these targets geared towards children of, this age group, you're going to have overlapping interventions, that many of these interventions would overlap and address childhood anemia, even though it wasn't stated. So through stunting, through wasting efforts, through preventing low birth weight, through enhancing maternal hemoglobin status, you could also prevent some childhood anemia as well. So, I mean, that's sort of where I try to bring myself back to, but I think this is really good feedback. And I think that there needs to be much more momentum at the country level to advocate for this. And we will still be advocating, and we've never given up on doing estimates of global prevalence of anemia in children. We've always carried that forward, and I think we will continue to carry that forward in our initiatives on anemia as well. And then the data side, huge need for data, especially in children less than 6 months of age. I mean, most countries do not include data on children less than 6 months of age. For many reasons, but we are currently looking at a lot of the hemoglobin data quality. We are starting some initiatives with our technical advisory group on monitoring. So it's called TEAM, that it's a WHO and UNICEF-led group to look at how we can improve the collection of hemoglobin data and get better data, so our estimates are also better. And really trying to understand, what we are calling anemia today, is that really the right cutoff levels, or should we be looking at different cutoffs as well? So we look to have some of those products developed within the next couple of years and now. So, but very good questions.
Thank you. Thanks for that. The next question is for you, Dylan. Our audience has asked, how much of the challenge of scaling is due to the enabling environment factors and considerations like regulatory and political issues, and how much is the technical challenge of uptake? And I think maybe linked to that, you could comment on, you talked about the speed and, the fact that we set very ambitious targets for scaling. What do you think would be an optimal ambition for scale related to home fortification based on where we are now?
Thank you very much for the questions, Mandana. I think in part the answer will depend on every context. Every context will be different in terms of what is already in place in the enabling environment. There's quite a range of structures and governance and capacity among the places that need anemia reduction interventions. So in the countries with stronger systems in place already, will be more likely to be able to scale up a technical innovation like MMPs or SQLNS more quickly. And in places with weaker systems in place already in enabling environments, they'll need to invest much more in preparing those, I think. So it quite depends, but in some of our economic analyses at the subnational level, I will say that we were quite surprised with how high the percentage of investment needed in the enabling environment is. It's much higher than often estimated in national or global investment cases. Not just a little bit of overhead that needs to be added on to the cost of a commodity or intervention. Needs communities and governments need significant investment in raising the bar of their enabling environment. Secondly, on your question about what would be an appropriate speed to scale up, I think that also depends on those preconditions for scaling. But I think we would be wise to look at the precedents of a similar intervention and maybe another micronutrient intervention that's scaled up in history and in a sample of countries that had similar systems in place and see if we could model the scale up of home fortification compared to vitamin A supplementation or iron folic acid, even though it's a different intervention, and be more realistic with our projections over time. I think because of funding cycles, we often try to rush scale up within 5 years, but I think we should see this as a 20 or 30-year project or more. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And just I wanted to note a few things that came, and I think there are more comments rather than questions, which is in setting up, targets, we have to also be realistic about what portion of the whole anemia could be changed with nutrition interventions. We did discuss that this is complex and multifactorial. So making sure that we set realistic objectives for what we want to see in terms of changing, as well as also realistic expectations for scale. So unfortunately, we're a little bit behind in time, and I have to reduce our time for Q&A. But something came in, and I really would like to ask actually both Kay and Lisa, if possible, to comment on that, which is countries are now developing their wasting reduction action plans or wasting action plans. And what would be a role, or is there a place in those action plans for home fortification? And if so, how we can kind of embed or influence those action plans to make sure that's one mechanism for gaining momentum for home fortification. Maybe Kay, you first, and then Lisa. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that question. The reference that I cited for small quantity LNS effects on anemia, there's another paper on growth effects, and that shows a significant reduction in wasting prevalence with small quantity LNS. And that's just for the cross-sectional prevalence of wasting. If you look at longitudinal prevalence, the impact is probably larger, and longitudinal prevalence is a lot higher than cross-sectional prevalence. It's something people don't always remember. But I think there's also a role for MNPs and for the other mechanisms that are available through fortified products in terms of reducing potentially infections and other things that can lead to wasting. So that these are interconnected, and improving nutrition, not just with iron, but with zinc and vitamin A and the other nutrients that are provided, can go a long way toward achieving all of those goals.
Thank you. And Lisa?
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I think there's lots of room for home fortification in the prevention of wasting. And I think there's lots of room for advocating to prevent wasting rather than waiting to focus on the treatment of wasting as well. So I think, as we work through our guidance, even on complementary feeding for infants and young children 6 to 23 months of age, we want to put in some of these messages about what to do if you think that your, child, what are some of the signals that you think your child is not receiving the appropriate amount. So they're not at that point of even being at risk. We want to do all the prevention that we can to make sure that infants are receiving and young children are receiving the best diet as possible. So that may need to include something like these home fortification techniques to improve those diets. And then within, so this should all get incorporated into, a whole strategy on the prevention and not just wait until you're treating. And I think there's lots of good roles to play, and there's not going to be one magic bullet. So I think we need a variety of interventions to be able to draw on, depending on that context that these local health providers have, and to make sure that we are matching the right intervention to the right context. And so as many interventions as we can that we know that are effective in those populations, the better.
Well, thank you very much to all the presenters. We really appreciate all the input that you've provided to a great beginning and discussion to today's meeting. I think it's a good note to end this section of today on, which is, making sure that, prevention is linked and embedded in all of our approaches to address nutrition issues such as wasting. We make sure that home fortification is placed and the plans for scaling are realistic. And we, again, make sure that we work together as a global community to make more impact and bring these proven interventions to scale. So with that, I would like to thank our presenters and move to our next section of the program, which is our panel. And if I may have my panelists on the screen, then I can go ahead with the introduction. Great. So our first panelist here is Dr. Stanis Latkin, who is the inaugural chief of the Sickkids Center for Global Child Health and professor of pediatrics, public health sciences and nutrition sciences at the University of Toronto. And of course, the former chair of the Home Fortification Technical Advisory Group. He has been the brain and the force behind the MNPs, and has led multiple projects for research, implementation, and also understanding better the role of these interventions in improving childhood nutrition. Our second panelist is Mr. Yusuf Koita. And Yusuf is the Chief of Nutrition Section at UNICEF Rwanda, with 20 years of experience in international nutrition. He has worked across continents and regions and in different countries to support maternal and infant nutrition. And currently, his key roles and responsibilities are to lead, plan, direct, administer, and evaluate the UNICEF-supported programs to improve the nutrition status of children and mothers in Rwanda. And then our panel member from Nigeria, Mr. John Uruakpa, who is Deputy Director and Head of a Macronutrient Deficiency Control and in the Ministry of Health in Nigeria. John is leading the work in Nigeria. He's worked is actively scaling up nutrition interventions, and now is working as head of the biofortification project as well as the home fortification project using the macronutrient powders. So as you know, now our panel is going to be focused on kind of more the practical aspects of looking at home fortification and MMPs and putting the kind of the technical discussions that we covered so far into the context of what's happening at the global and country level. I would like to start with posing questions to the panelists from Nigeria and Rwanda, talking about the kind of local context. As we discussed, the World Health Assembly, if we were supposed to set up these targets for young children that we discussed today, do you think that setting these targets would encourage ministers of health in your country to initiate and maintain programs, for example, macronutrient powders or other types of home fortification? And if yes, how do you think that this momentum can be increased for action in your country? So first, I would like to ask John to comment, and then we will go to you. John, over to you.
Thank you very much, Madonna. And yes, the question you ask is, my response is yes, it will help in encouraging the government to scale up home fortification in Nigeria. But not only that, it's not a matter of setting a target, but it also has to do getting the government to make commitment towards that target at that level, at a higher level. Once we get the government to make commitment, make pronouncement, or make a declaration, it will spur them into doing more. For instance, in Nigeria now, home fortification is not new. Since 2014, we have adopted it, and it's in our micronutrient deficiency guideline. And we in Nigeria, we have 36 states of the federation, including the capital, FC, making it 37. And presently, home fortification using MUMP is being scaled up to 24 states. However, it's not in all the local governments. We have what we call 774 local governments in Nigeria. But the home fortification is being carried out in less than 30% of this, and the acceptability level is very, very high. So if we get the government to make commitment towards any target, it will attract more investment, both from the government, private sectors, and from the partners. Though our partners, UNICEF and NAI in country, is trying a lot, supporting government towards this end. Presently now, we are collaborating with the UNICEF in scaling it up to 24 states, while NAI is also planning to carry out survey in some urban localities in the Federal Capital Territory. So we are really working, but all these efforts are just a drop of water inside the ocean. You know, Nigeria is a large country. So we will need more investment, more support from the NGOs, and getting our government to, make commitment towards releasing more funds. They are doing a lot, but Nigeria is very large.
Thank you very much. So maybe with that, great comments, and going to Yusuf to talk about Rwanda and maybe some of the, comment on some of these aspects in your country and how we will get to making those government commitments for home fortification.
Thank you so much, Mandana, for this very important question. In the case of Rwanda, maybe just allow me to give a bit of background on Rwanda. Rwanda is a country which is committed to address all the forms of malnutrition in this country. And the country have done a great progress. The stunting is reduced below, the wasting, is reduced below the 5%. Wasting is relatively under control as of today. When we look at to the stunting also, the rate is going down clearly from 50% in 2005. We are talking today about 33% in 2020, which is a great progress. But when we go beyond that, we very quickly realize that even though we are doing that progress in the context of Rwanda, we still have only 20% of children under 5 who are meeting the minimum acceptable diet. So all the points that Kay was raising in her presentation are really present in the context of Rwanda. Meeting the need of children in terms of iron intake, it's very challenging in the context of Rwanda. There's still a lot remain to be done in this context of Rwanda. The government is committed to tackle all forms of malnutrition, including reducing anemia. We didn't see yet clear national target being set, but the government have already anticipated and engaged in implementing a national micronutrient supplementation program. As of today, that program is already implemented at scale, covering all the 30 districts of this country. Setting an international target will certainly help to foster that government ownership. It will help to maintain that momentum and certainly will contribute to also ensure some kind of sustainability behind those targets which have been, behind those results which have been already achieved in the context of Rwanda. So setting a international target on anemia will be very helpful in the context of Rwanda to maintain the momentum, to maintain the program at scale, and also ensure certainly some kind of sustainability behind.
Thank you very much for that. Sorry, I think there was a little bit of a breakage. Okay, Yusuf, are you finished?
Yes, Mandana, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for your comments. I wanted to ask Stan, your experience spans over multiple countries and contexts. I wanted to ask you if you could comment on how you have seen this sustainability and government momentum being achieved in various contexts.
Thank you, Mandana. It has been a challenge over many years. And I think that the comments that Dylan made about expectations around how long it takes to introduce something new, to develop targets, to actually convince governments to include, for example, micronutrient powders in their national nutrition strategy takes a long time. And I think the point that Dylan made is really important. We have to be reasonable in our expectations. Generally in my life, I like to be reasonable, but somewhat impatient. And I think in this case, impatience is a good thing. We need to help governments through the UN agencies, through various advocacy avenues to change the status of individual countries. I think the WHO recommendations perhaps were very important 10 years ago. I think including micronutrient powders in the essential drug list of WHO and UNICEF has been very important. We need additional tools to improve advocacy to assist countries in making the right decisions. There are many competing priorities within countries, so that the arguments that we make to, for example, include fortification in national strategies must be evidence-based and it must be coherent. But despite the fact that it is taking a long time, I would suggest that we have to be a little bit impatient. Back to you, Mandana.
Thank you. Thanks for that. And I would say I would agree with you. I think that this is important, to be realistic, but also make sure that we set the priorities and we really put a lot of energy and passion behind it, because it's important and it's about children that we are all passionate about in this case. So I would like to go back to John. We did discuss a little bit the challenges for sustaining these initiatives at the country level. And there had even been a question from the audience asking, with the changes that happen in leadership, a lot of contexts that we have worked in, that's something that happens a lot. It's political reasons or other reasons, leaders change, priorities change. How do we deal with those changes and still keep the sustainability and commitment to the home fortification programs in future?
Well, thank you very much, Mara, for that question. Really, there is change in, political leadership, but government is a continuity. If we get it done, put into the nutrition strategy work plan, I think subsequent government will carry on that. And that will mean more advocacy to the political leaders, which will be led by partners, and some other international agencies. For subsequent government that comes in, there should be a new advocacy, letting them know the importance of continuing, supporting nutrition initiatives and programs. I think by that, we will get it going, because nutrition is something that we cannot run away from, even right from the family. We are happy in this part of the country that nutrition is being given the right attention now. Because previously, when you talk about nutrition, people think it's just domestic cooking. But now many have come to know that it is beyond that. And attention is being given to it by Nigeria, for instance, because that's where I come from. A lot of great attention. Like now, government has entered into partnership with World Bank, and they have come out with what we call IRIN project now in Nigeria. It's a lot of money, a lot of investment. And it's only targeted commitment, and then the government is making in every area of nutrition, both at the federal level and at the state level. Even coming up with policies, enabling environment for partners to work, providing security for them. So I think nutrition we need is more and encouragement, investment in the area of local production of nutrition commodities, like this MOMP we are about, small quantity liquid, supplement, and so many others, MOMOS. And if we can have
Sorry, it seems that we have some technical issues with John's connection, unfortunately. I think I'm going to ask Yusuf to address the same topic about sustainability and dealing with the change in leadership in your context.
The network is bad.
Yes, John, sorry we missed you. Okay, do you want to finish your thoughts? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, it's the network. So what I'm saying is that actually change of leadership may not be a problem because government is continuity. And what we need to advocate to the new leadership to continue investment in nutrition. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So basically the role of people like yourself who are dedicated at the kind of more technical level and they ensure that continuity is really important, and you ensure also that the right kinds of recommendations are being made when the plans for investments such as the World Bank projects are being made. So thank you for that. And yes, now time to come to Yusuf. Please, some comments about the Rwandan context.
In the Rwandan context, the change in leadership, it's not such a big issue also. For a simple reason, we are in a country where there is certain stability, which allowed to have that type of continuity in the administration going on. But even with that, we are facing also time to time change management here and there, change in institutional environment and so on. But as you have clearly mentioned it, and as my predecessor John have also mentioned it, there is some kind of continuity going on, going forward. In Rwanda, the political commitment is very high to tackle malnutrition. And we have a chance also to be in a context where the level of accountability is also well shared and spread all along the administration and all along all the systems. So once the stunting and the fight against all forms of malnutrition have been clearly embedded within those mechanisms of accountability, whatever can be the change in management happening, the processes continue. And that have really played a great role within the context of Rwanda to ensure we will have certainly every time to come back for a new leader, sensitization, new leader, advocacy, but the systems are already in place and functioning well. We can continue building on that and keep going. In the case of Rwanda, the most challenge that we have faced was mainly about the financial sustainability of this program. As I said, with the external and partner support mainly, we were able to scale up countrywide the program. But now that we have completely handed over to the government, with the government leading the process, we are really facing that challenge in terms of predictable funding issue. They have committed, they have tried to mobilize some internal resources, particularly for the commodities. Unfortunately, in between, the COVID pandemic have hurted them very strongly. And then we saw the program once again going down. So we are in that phase where we didn't reach yet that financial stability to allow to maintain the trends and the progress where there are. This is the main constraint that we are facing here, the challenge that we are facing here in Rwanda. But in terms of government commitment, the commitment is there and continuously. In terms of mechanisms and systems, they are in place and functioning properly. Over. Back to you, Anne Mandana.
Thank you. Yes, and really great. It has actually been delightful to observe Rwanda and how you've progressed, really bringing all these different actors and sectors together, even from early childhood development, nutrition, and health. And that's really a great case to perhaps learn from also further in future. Stan, I wanted to come back to you with one question that, still I think this issue is being debated, that diets of young children have to be adequate and especially to meet the iron needs. And then we saw a case presentation and some realistic analysis of, really, is that possible? What are your thoughts on that? And maybe also putting the home fortification and the need for it in the broader context of diets.
Thank you, Mandana. This, I think, is a good question. We've all heard and read about recommendations for feeding in the first 1, 2, and 3 years of life. For the first 6 months, there's no argument. Exclusive breastfeeding is the only food for children. After that, children should continue to breastfeed. And the typical recommendations say words like the following: we should provide children with high quality complementary foods. We should focus on dietary diversity. And I fear that the assumption is that if we focus on high quality complementary foods, if we focus on dietary diversity, then all of the nutrient needs can be met for the child, including the needs for iron. And as Dr. Dewey said and explained so clearly in her presentation an hour ago, it is nearly impossible to meet the iron needs from high quality complementary foods and dietary diversification, at least between 6 and 12 months of age. Kay talked about the fact that you would have to feed children chicken livers on a daily basis to meet their iron needs. So although it is important to talk about high quality complementary foods and dietary diversification, these messages are somewhat misleading because there is, I think, an innate assumption that if you follow the advice for high quality complementary foods and dietary diversification, that you can meet the iron needs of infants and young children. And unfortunately, this simply is not true. So I think, Mandana, it is really important going forward that we start talking about, in a more honest way, about what complementary foods can and cannot provide with regard to iron. In high-income countries, there has been an understanding that high-quality complementary feeds cannot meet the iron needs of all infants. Thus, for commercially available complementary foods, they're all highly fortified with iron. The reason we came up with the idea of home fortification with micronutrient powders is that home-prepared foods could be fortified with iron because of a realization that even dietary diversity does not meet the iron needs of children. So I think that those providing guidelines for families around the world should be somewhat more obvious in their portrayal that high quality complementary foods and dietary diversification will not work without fortification to meet the iron needs of children.
Thanks, and I think we should add to that the current COVID context and the fact that the vulnerabilities of households is even going to be more, and the issues with lack of diversity and lack of resources are even getting worse. And even in the context of building resilience and response mechanisms to COVID and future preparation for pandemics such as this one, like at NI, we are looking at things like prepositioning of supplies at the household or at the community level. And a part of that could be these home fortification supplements and the ability for households to be resilient in case the diversity is even less achievable than it is possible today. So thanks for that. We are coming close to the close of our panel. Thank you so much for a really good discussion. I just wanted to give 1 minute to each of you to make your final comments. I'll start with John, then Yusuf, and then Stan. John, over to you.
Thank you, Mandela. Well, my final comment is that every child, especially those from the low-income population, should be availed the opportunity to use MOMP in their diet, because most of the complementary foods are lacking iron in our food, are lacking in iron. And for us to address the iron deficiency in this population, there is need to avail these children the opportunity to add MOMP in their diet, in their food. Thank you.
Thank you. Yusuf?
Yeah, very quickly, for the context of Rwanda, what I would like to share here is that taking at scale this MNP program to contribute to the reduction of anemia, it's something which is feasible. In many, many contexts, it's something which we can achieve at scale, producing the results that we are expecting. But in order for us to reach there, one need to keep in mind there are some basics elements which we shouldn't lose from the beginning when we are planning or designing such type of program, if we wanted it to be at scale, sustained for a long period. The first of it is we don't need to create the wheel again. It needs to be embedded on existing systems. And those systems need to have some attributes which in the context of Rwanda have really been useful and allowed to achieve those results. The first of them is this political commitment. The political will, we can't go without it. Second element is the leadership, the role of the leadership in this mechanism. Champions at each level of the entire pyramid of service delivery platforms. The third element, which to me have played a great and wonderful role in the context of Rwanda, is the accountability. And finally, the commitment of the people all along the chain until the end of the system. Combining those elements together, plus some very smart investment, there is no place for failure. There is no place for failure. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And Stan?
Thank you, Mandana. I believe that the World Health Association Global Nutrition Targets are actually really important. Targets guide decision makers. They force governments into making commitments. They force governments into taking ownership. And having targets leads to tracking, it leads to monitoring, evaluation, and it leads to reports. There are currently 6 WHA targets on stunting, low birth weight, overweight, exclusive breastfeeding, wasting, and finally, anemia. We don't need a 7th part target, but what we do need is we need to change the wording on the anemia target. The current anemia target talks about a 50% reduction in anemia for women in the reproductive age. We simply need to add to that a 50% reduction in anemia for women in the reproductive age and children. So over to you, World Health Organization, to lead this charge to amend the 6 global nutrition targets to change the wording of the anemia target to include infants and young children. It will be very important as an advocacy tool. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stan, for those powerful comments. So we are coming to the close of our session, and I would like to hand it over to our last speaker, but certainly not the least, my colleague and friend and co-chair at HFTAG, and Ms. Grania Maloney, who is a senior advisor at UNICEF headquarters in early childhood nutrition. Grania, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mandana. What a fantastic session. So on behalf of all members of the HFTAG, I would like to extend our sincere appreciation to all of the excellent presenters and the panelists and all the participants, of course, for joining us today. The challenge of addressing anemia in early childhood is a major public health priority, yet without indicators and targets, going back to what Dr. Zlotkin just said, it's not visible. And if it's not visible, it's not prioritized and it's not tracked, and we can't give it the attention it needs. So we really hope that today's discussion will influence global policy discussions and decisions, especially given the significant burden and the lack of progress we are seeing in this issue. Some of you may be aware of UNICEF's flagship report that we released on the eve of the Food Systems Summit, Fed to Fail, the crisis of diets in early childhood. And this looked specifically at the complementary feeding. And in summary, what it showed is that 2 in 3 children, so 2 in 3 of our children globally, are not getting the healthy diets they need to grow well. And a major issue, the major driver is the quality of diets. So we have to look at solutions to improve those diets, and supplementation and home fortification strategies are key innovations to help us in that journey. Now we have this extraordinary opportunity with the upcoming Nutrition for Growth Summit. It's in 3 weeks, actually less than 3 weeks, 7th and 8th of December in Tokyo. And all of us online, the UN agencies, the civil society, the academics, the governments, we have an opportunity to change things, to make smart, ambitious commitments to this somewhat hidden crisis and show that we are willing to step up to the game and meet the needs of our children to give them the best chance for a healthy outcome. The Home Fortification Technical Advisory Group is committed to this agenda. And moving forward, we will continue to provide technical guidance, to synthesize knowledge, and to advocate for acceleration of home fortification strategies as a key part of this solution. So thank you, and back to you, Mandana.
Thank you very much for the great and powerful comments, Grania, as well. And I would like to thank all the speakers and panelists for being here with us today, to all of those who participated as audience and stayed with us till the last moments. I wanted to note that the platform will have the resources available, the presentations available, and you could still actually forward the link to your colleagues. They can register and then get access to these resources. So please do go ahead and help us still disseminate and get the word around, especially as we are moving towards the 7th and 8th of December and the discussions of the Nutrition for Growth Summit. I would like to thank all of the HFTAG members for their support of the platform and contributions to the conceptualization of this event, all of my colleagues at Nutrition International, and also the colleagues from the IT platform support who helped us really with the navigating this platform and coming up with this engaging contribution from the Home Fortification Technical Advisory Group. Thank you, everybody, and looking forward to further conversations on childhood anemia. Bye.
Thank you.